of them. So I open this roundtable saying good afternoon to everybody, to all the participants, and welcome to this final TMC 2020 roundtable. To start, I would like to thank Professor Sirkeci and Professor Merita Zulfio Alili, the scientific and the organization committees for offering us this very rich program, even in this very difficult times. It is not by chance that this roundtable is dedicated to COVID-19 pandemic and the migration policy challenges, putting into connection to the main phenomena of these days. The first and evident, we could say even obvious, reason of this connection is that by definition migration is the movement of individuals from one geographical area to another, and coronavirus, like any other virus, would not spread without this movement. This topical subject has, of course, very ancient roots, and for instance, the Italian immigrants, especially in USA, straddling the 19th and the 20th century, were considered disease carriers, and they were stopped at the borders for insanity. Nevertheless, today I will invite our distinguished speakers to focus their interventions rather on the current situation, the challenges, and the future trends of the migration policies. So, if you agree, I suggest to start with the first round of 5 minutes, which would allow you to highlight the main points you are going to develop. Following a second round, you will have few more minutes, and conclude as usual with the questions from the audience. Giuseppe Brescia, the first of our speakers, I think is not yet connected, so I will invite Agnes Igoye to start her intervention after a quick presentation of her role and career. So Agnes escaped human traffickers at 14, which is a very important start. When the Lord's Resistance Army railed their village in search of virgins. Today she serves as Uganda's Deputy National Coordinator for the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons, is the Commandant Uganda Immigration Training Academy, and contributes to teach an online child protection course at Harvard University. She's a member of the Labour Migration Expert Reference Group at the Intergovernmental Authority on Development Regional Bloc. She built a rehabilitation center for survivors of human trafficking in Uganda and serves as an ambassador and mentor at the Clinton Global Initiative University. She's one of the New African Magazine's 100 most influential Africans in 2015, and she's a recipient of several awards. So Agnes, the floor is yours, please. A first round of, let's say, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and greetings from sunny Uganda, and it's a privilege to join this panel. If I just dive into, because the topic is COVID-19 pandemic and migration policy challenges. I recall when the pandemic hit, I was one of the people who was in the situation room of Uganda. While they were telling other people to go home and stay at home, I was in the situation room and part of the team, to monitor Uganda's borders, 54 of them. And in that situation, we also had to map out, the 33, porous borders. So for us, stopping migration was not necessarily mean that people stopped crossing borders. So I'll explain that in details. But also, as a Deputy National Coordinator, Prevention of Trafficking Persons, we also noted some glaring, challenges, because especially among low-skilled workers, as governments responded, to their citizens, mapping out those COVID-19 interventions. These low-skilled workers, especially who worked in the informal economy, like domestic workers, had poor legal protection. They were excluded from the labor rights and social security, which means that some of them with their irregular status, had that unpredictable income, and they went through so many challenges, which I will, get into, and which is happening today, because up to now they are still locked, like the victims of trafficking are still locked up with their traffickers, and some abandoned en route as they move forward. I also saw certain trends, among displaced populations. That was really of concern to me, because, I remember at 14 I was displaced as a child and lived an internally displaced people's camp. But I also saw globally how refugees and asylum seekers, got stranded. I recall very well in one of our borders, with the Democratic Republic of Congo, there were people who were stranded, at the border stations close to the border, because people were fearful, they've locked up borders. And I remember, my President Museveni, because Uganda has a very progressive refugee, policy, and we allow, people in. So he had to make a directive, and while so many refugees and asylum seekers were struggling, we had to open up, in July to allow, certain people to come in. And you can imagine during all those chaotic times, and that happened. So I'm really excited, about this, because I know that time is not of essence. I'll dive into those into details during the second round of the presentation. So thank you very much, and back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Now is to Helén to give her intervention. Helén Nilsson is the director of the Nordic Council of Ministers of Lithuania. She has been analyst on focusing on migration as Director General Office Swedish Institute, Head of Baltic Sea Unit at the Swedish Institute, and Head of Office for the IOM office in Istanbul. So please, Helén, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So thank you also for inviting me, and a little bit different maybe angle than from Uganda, but let me maybe just start to explain a little bit about my organization, so you understand what I'm talking from what angle. So the Nordic Council of Ministers is the official body for intergovernmental cooperation in the Nordic region, which involves Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, as well as the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Åland. And it seeks Nordic solutions wherever and whenever the countries can achieve more together than by working on their own. So that is the focus, and we have a vision, and that is to make the Nordic region the most sustainable and integrated region in the world. And I would also like to maybe, because I think you have to picture me somehow, and so please allow me to also mention that we consist of a network of 12 institutions, including research that right now doing research on different strategies with common efforts. And that institution is Nordforsk in Oslo, as well as the Nordic Welfare Center in Stockholm that is responsible for the Nordic, or follow up what we are doing in the field of integration and migration, as well as Nordregio when it comes to statistics in the field of integration. And when I talk about COVID and migration, I would like to focus on 3 issues, and that is segregation, migration to the Nordics, and the group of children. And I hope that will contribute to our discussion. And when it comes to segregation, there is awareness that the crisis the society is now experiencing means that the differences between people has increased. It has been noted, for example, that residents in certain areas with social economic challenges have been hit harder by the spread of COVID-19. And it becomes clear that people have different conditions to protect themselves against the virus. And there are numbers of socio-economic challenges regarding overcrowding. Many have occupations that we have no possibility to work from home. There are already health challenges, and there was no access to relevant information, maybe in different languages from start. When it comes to migration, I would just like to refer to my own country, Sweden, knowing that the numbers are a little bit higher compared to the other Nordic countries when it comes to resettlement. And actually the Swedish Migration Agency is postponing the receiving quota refugees due to the COVID. And the numbers will not decrease, but the municipalities should be prepared to more concentrated reception when the resettlement starts again. But on a more positive note, Norway has already decided to receive people from Lesbos after what's happening in Moria. And then I also would like a little bit later then to mention briefly about circular migration in our region. That is also have an effect on COVID. And lastly, the children, the corona crisis risk. I mean, the situation for children that are most vulnerable have increased, so to say, in the countries, as we have in some of the countries, the school has been closed. And for some of the children, the schools are, of course, so to say, the heaven. And here we can see that children without papers or in migration, such as unaccompanied minors or newly arrived families, are more vulnerable than others. Thank you.
Thank you, Helén. I could see one more speaker joining us earlier. Is in the company of Professor Jeffrey Cohen, who is, I could say, a column of the TMCs, and is a professor of anthropology at the Ohio State University. He has conducted research on migration, rural development and food in Mexico, Turkey and China, with support of the National Science Foundation, National Geographic Society and Fulbright program. So please, Jeffrey, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Michela. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is Bailey, who keeps me very busy. Anyway, he's going away.
These are the advantage of the online meetings.
Yeah, it's the disadvantages that I have this. But anyway, thank you all. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Michela, for that introduction. Bailey is, he's my co-investigator, I guess. So my work has gone in a lot of directions, and one of the critical things that happened this spring, of course, was that, well, not even this spring, but earlier in the year, was that COVID arrived. And what it did was actually interrupt a good bit of research, which was neither here nor there, really. But what it did was give me the opportunity to rethink some of the research that I do, and to rethink how the pandemic and in particular how COVID-19 really affects outcomes for movers. And so I want to just pick up on 2 points as we move forward and as a way to contribute to this the conversation that we're having. And I think that these really reflect on what Agnes and Helén have already talked about. And this is really to think about what I would call the direct and indirect outcomes of COVID. So if we look at the direct kinds of effects, we're looking specifically at the structures, the process, and the fundamental ways that the pandemic is going to affect migration in terms of things like infection rates, perhaps, and so forth. But there are also, in many ways, a lot of indirect outcomes of COVID-19. And these are the things that, for me, have become absolutely critical. The most important being the ways in which COVID-19 affects the social inequalities that define suffering, right? And that define the kinds of limits that confront different populations as they migrate. And I've had the honor and pleasure of working with a refugee community here in Central Ohio. It's the Bhutanese community that arrived in 2008. It's when the earliest folks from that community arrived in Columbus, and working with them as they're adapting to the challenges of COVID-19 captures the direct and indirect challenges in, I think, a profound way. So I'll leave it to the rest of the panel, and we can come back to this in terms of questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Now the floor to Ibrahim, Professor Ibrahim Sirkeci, who doesn't need any presentation, I suppose. Please, Ibrahim.
Thank you, Michela. Thank you everyone for joining this panel today. I am terribly sorry we had a bit of a hiccup at the beginning and we had to reset the link and the channel, but I'm glad we are here. It is recorded, by the way, so we will be able to share it after the event. Those who missed it will be able to see it on the YouTube channel. So, I mean, COVID-19 is obviously closely linked to human mobility. Not only migrants, but in general, anybody on the move is a party to the spread of such diseases. We know that for sure. This is a scientific fact. It is part of the diffusion. Nevertheless, there is also research showing that these severe diseases are caused by human encroachment into wildlife. That's the bottom of the problem. Also, it is important to note for us, animal movements, animal migrations are at least as important as human mobility. So beyond that, obviously, we have a clear connection between the mobility and COVID pandemic spread around the world, but also because it is easy to scapegoat immigrants and foreigners. We have seen a lot of remarks, negative remarks about immigrants. We have heard foreign virus quite often from various leaders. We have heard, Chinese virus, at least from one. And yet, we have also evidence that in many countries, and particularly in China, there were adverse reactions towards immigrants and foreign visitors who were visible. So people were reacting to foreigners and immigrants mainly as a result of these, discourses, quite, toxic discourses in media and politics. But we also know it is still not, there is no conclusive evidence that this virus is from China. Although there are many signs to that direction, it is not confirmed. And we are also at very early stages of this experience, in a sense, although we are 6 months into it. As many experts believe, COVID-19 will remain to be a challenge for some years to come. I would like to share with you some early thoughts about the prospects for migration, immigrants, and migration policy making in this regard. As we all know, COVID-19, like any other crisis, hit the most vulnerable and the deprived the worst. This trend is expected to continue. So it is not unique in this sense. We have seen minorities taking the brunt of the pandemic, higher infection rates, higher death rates, and so on. Of course, it is related to overall economic inequalities, insecurities, as we know. Today, we should perhaps also not forget to remember the victims of the 9/11. It was an event drastically changed the human mobility scene around the world. Maybe it didn't feel like that at the time, and many just accepted it as granted. We have seen more and more security measures introduced and borders closed to those who feel most insecure in countries where they reside, where they come from. Similarly, the global financial crisis that started in 2008 did an impact in different avenues, though. Inequalities and poverty have been deepening in many places ever since 2008. The increasing immigration pressures in countries of origin met with economic downturns in destinations, and as a result, we have seen rising walls and reinforcing borders more and more by several countries. Again, one remarkable as US did, put more effort into that rather than alleviating all these root causes. Again, this has made the most insecure less able to migrate. We know for sure migration is a reaction to insecurities, which are expressed in many domains, from economics to culture, politics, family life, gender identities, and aspirations, if you need to name. So COVID is itself, on the one hand, a source of insecurity, but also as a leverage to make admission policies much tighter and immigrations more difficult. It creates further insecurities involved or intending to migrate. So in countries where COVID-19 hit worse, such as the UK, many immigrants we have seen, especially the newcomers, have returned to their countries of origin in the last 6 months or so. There is anecdotal evidence for this to support this, but possibly we will see that will be reflected in statistics soon. Many countries have closed their borders or imposed further restrictions on travel and immigration. And we have seen desperate and insecure thousands felt the urge to move at whatever cost and means. For example, we have seen an increase in number of irregular crossings from through the channel. Let me show you this graphic to represent what is that jump I am talking about. So you see for the last 12 months, the number of channel crossings by migrants in small boats in between France, Belgium, and the UK. So it is almost 6 to 8-fold increase in last 5-6 months since after March 2020, which was the beginning of lockdown measures in the UK. So it is not a small matter. We are talking about thousands of people, and as we all very well know, crossing the channel or crossing other seas around the world is one of the most dangerous things anybody can do. So we have seen this is taking place. So it is partly similar to what happened in Turkey actually towards the end of 2015, because the EU-Turkey agreement was due to come into effect in early 2016, and many stranded, hundreds of thousands stranded in the country, rushed to move to Europe. And this was kind of like the root cause of the 2015 crisis in a sense. So immigrants who were in France saw either an opportunity to cross the channel or felt urged to do so, expecting much harsher controls introduced with the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures taken after that. So my expectation is that migration will be ever more difficult from now on. It will be more costly in any sense or shape or form. And this is both due to the pandemic and its adverse impacts on economy, politics, and culture. Current migrants, already feeling it, but they will feel less and less welcome, and potential migrants will be discouraged or outpriced in terms of what I call 4 C's. That's human capital, social capital, financial capital, and physical capability. I think I will draw a line here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I've been trying to put more light on my face, but it's not working very much. Maybe it's my dark soul that is prevailing. I can see our first speaker, Giuseppe Brescia. I'm happy you could join us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Giuseppe Brescia is Chairman of Constitutional Affairs Committee at the Chamber of Deputies in Italy. He's at the second term as MP for 5 Stars Movement, Movimento 5 Stelle, elected in Apulia. So in this roundtable, there are already 2 people from the same region, Apulia. We are the relative majority. He deals with migration issues, collaborating with the Home Affairs Minister Lamorgese and other parties to elaborate the draft of the new decree about migration. In the past term, he was Deputy Chairman of Inquiry Committee of Migration and Reception System. So please, Giuseppe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. After some problems with connection, we are here. Happy to be with you. I will start and I will speak as fast as possible because I know that I have just 5 minutes. So let's start with the second slide. The global health crisis linked to the COVID-19 has had a remarkable impact on the implementation of the right asylum, highlighting once again contradiction and fragilities of the European and national asylum system and the difficulty of arriving at coordinated solutions. As soon as awareness and seriousness of the situation linked to the pandemic emergency grow, several member states have adopted measures motivated by the needs of public health protection. Measures such as travel bans, health screening at entry, and the application of quarantine for new arrivals may be justified by public health protection requirements, but could also prevent the general admission of refugees or asylum seekers without evidence of health risk and without measures to protect against refoulement. The third slide talk about the organization in the field of the protection of migrants' rights. The European Commission and the UNHCR have provided specific indication to ensure the effectiveness of the right to asylum in the context of the health emergency. UNHCR has issued a compilation of good practices and practical recommendation to support states in ensuring access to territory while protecting public health with medical screening or testing, maintaining registration and documentation, which means to support the applicant to submit the registration request, preventing transmission in the context of reception and detention. The fourth slide is about the European Commission. 16 March 2020, the Commission adopted a communication calling for a temporary restriction on non-essential travel to the EU in view of COVID-19. The extension to this temporary restriction extended to persons in need of international protection or who must be admitted to the territory of the member states for another humanitarian reasons. Any restriction in the field of asylum, return and resettlement must be proportional, implemented in a non-discriminatory way, and take into account the principle of non-refoulement and obligation under international law. In April, EU Commission prepared guidance with the ISO and Frontex concerns about asylum, resettlement and repatriation. Now let's focus on Italy with the fifth and the sixth slide. COVID-19 had a negative impact on repatriation and relocations, and this mainly concerns Tunisia. Obviously, the issue of landings coupled with the health risk of the pandemic is very important national security issue. Decree Cura Italia in March introduced several measures, including also some provision relating to the reception and protection in health of immigrants. Firstly, it extended the migrant reception project of local authorities expiring on 30 June 2020 to the end of the year. These are the projects engaged under the protection system for holders of international protection and for unaccompanied foreign minors, the CPROIMI system, the so-called second reception. Furthermore, foreigners can remain until the end of the state of the emergency in case of reception centers that host them, even if the conditions for their stay are no longer valid. Applicants for international protection are holders and humanitarian protection subjected to the quarantine period with active surveillance or in permanent fiduciary home with active surveillance can be accommodated in the CPROIMI systems, CPROIMI facilities, ordinarily intended only for refugees and unaccompanied minors. Decree Law Rilancio in May other interventions, such as a procedure for the emergence of irregular work, but we will focus on it on the next part on the roundtable. The only thing I want to say is about rescue at sea. Italian government had temporarily suspended the classification of place of safety of safe place for Italian ports by virtue of provisions of the Hamburg Convention for cases of rescue carried out by naval unit flying a foreign flag outside the Italian SAR area. A further measure taken is represented by the so-called quarantine ships. They are private ferries used to isolate migrants arriving in Italy by sea, and they were established by the government on April 12 with a civil protection decree. According to this decree, all people who have been rescued by NGO boats should be moved to these ships. If the test for coronavirus is negative, it's necessary to remain on board for 15 days. If it's positive, you can stay on the ship until the swab becomes negative. During these days, we have seen, for example, the quarantine ship Rhapsody docked in Lampedusa. I finished for now. Thank you.